Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Walmsley. I'm Senior Manager at Ofgem in our DSO team. I'm going to be presenting this afternoon on a perspective of how Ofgem is seeking to enable investment in digitalisation to facilitate the net zero future. Now, I was reviewing this title as preparing slides and realised there are probably three really quite loaded parts of this. The first is around investment, which is obviously quite a topical issue, particularly at the moment under the RIA programs. The second part around digitalisation, and the third part around net zero. So all of these have quite a lot to go into. I will do my best to give this some justice over a short period, but I think it's worth bearing in mind that some of these processes are live and some of the discussions and consultations are currently out. So let's see how far we go on. I will also admit to the point that this is probably largely electricity focused, more so on the distribution side. That's where I'm spend more of my time at work, but hopefully I can cover some of the whole systems areas. I know that's a particular area of interest for the audience. So my role in Ofgem really is around some of the liaison between the Modernising Energy Data Group, our strategy teams, policy teams, my RIO colleagues, and engineering colleagues, and I act as a kind of liaison almost across these types of pieces of work. And DSO, distribution system operation, covers a lot of these quite broad topics. So I'm going to carry on through and do my best to enlighten on some of our current thinking on these topics. So I started with this slide. Perhaps for some of you doing homeschooling recently, the triangle on the left may be familiar. It's I think it's referred to as the sustainability triangle, the economic, social and environmental balance, and how, if Ofgem is attempting to cover a lot of these different areas, how we as an organisation, under our remit, which is protect the consumer, how do we do that for both the financial and economic side, environmental, our remit around net zero, and also Ofgem has quite a clear remit on social elements. So protecting vulnerable consumers, for instance, is a priority area for us. So we have to essentially balance a lot of these kind of sustainability targets, whether they're termed as sustainability or whether they're termed as just protecting the consumer. There's this ongoing balance and a challenge of doing that. The second triangle on the right might be more familiar to some of the project managers in the room or on the call. It's the kind of golden triangle of project management. Do you have quality, time, or resource? And so if we're regarding investment for net zero or any of the policies which I'm working on, or the RIO program, there's always this tension and this balance around balancing each of these three elements. I guess the rule of thumb is you can really have two of the three, and which one do you want to compromise on? So if you want something very quick and very cheap, well, it might not be very good. If you want something very good and very quick, well, it's going to be expensive. So which of those do you balance? And I suppose this is something I'll refer back to, but it's worth bearing in mind the challenges around net zero, challenges around digitalisation always come up with these kind of issues. So to move us on, I have recycled a slide which Dinka, I believe, presented earlier this afternoon as well. Not only because we're obviously coordinated with our modernising energy data work, and stealing each other's slides is probably only the tip of the iceberg, one would hope, with our coordination. But really, there's a line there which I've zoomed in on, which it's the bottom element. It was basically highlighting the work Ofgem is doing in our regulation for data and digitalisation. And I was going to pull out some of those specific areas and talk through what we're doing. I think I often kind of see this as like a filter. We have the top level strategic work, which Dinka and colleagues at BEIS are working on, and obviously the Modernising Energy Data Group between Ofgem, BEIS, Innovate UK, Office of National Statistics. There's quite a few parties in there. But there's this kind of next layer down, which is where I'm more involved and where Ofgem has more of a delivery type function. How do you go from a strategy to a set of actions and policies, procedures, licenses, codes, these kind of more detailed instances where we have to essentially demonstrate turning strategy into reality and processes. So that's where I'm going to try and drill down. Now, in order to do that, I pulled out 3 key areas. The RIIO price control, policies that are not in the price control, but are worth referring to, and innovation. And all of these have a degree of investment, a degree of digitalisation. I'll run through these in turn. So the work under RIIO, you'll see on this slide, I basically set out, and this is public domain information about the timeline, and this one pulls out ED2. As I said at the top, the distribution price control is probably where I'm more versed, and there are, I would say, probably an order of magnitude more details and more issues once you get into the distribution network. It's where we're expecting a lot more load-related increase. How do you balance those kind of things? So the focus here on distribution, but a lot of these issues are across the price control for different sectors as well, whether it's gas or electricity transmission. It's worth bearing in mind. But the chart which I put on the bottom left is basically sets out some of our challenges. There may be initiatives, there may be schemes which fall into any one of those 4 buckets. There may be schemes which are low cost and low uncertainty, which say, well, that's probably more straightforward. But then you get to, okay, what happens when you increase the uncertainty or you increase the cost? Say you need to roll out a new type of technology, but you're not sure exactly where, or the cost might be quite substantial over a 5-year price control period. These are basically the issues that we're grappling with and that we're consulting on, and have recently closed our consultation on the sector-specific methodology. But what I was pointing out really is that these trade-offs and balances between uncertainty and cost require us to use a range of tools in order to enable this investment. So whether that's a baseline funding type model, whether it's the use of quite specific and detailed incentives, such as there was a DSO incentive was put forward in the consultation, and we received quite a lot of feedback, which we're currently reviewing on that. Or whether it's more of a deliverable and output, or a volume driver, essentially funding attached to the level of rollout of a particular technology or piece of hardware, or whether there are things which are really generally very uncertain and will remain uncertain, and therefore we need some kind of uncertainty mechanism such as a reopener. So with each of these, there is, again, that kind of trade-off which I talked about at the beginning. Do you have something which is very fast, or do you have something which is more labor intensive? So for instance, a reopener is labor intensive for industry, it's labor intensive for Ofgem. A volume driver is probably more, probably a faster kind of deployment of change. But each of those have with them their own trade-offs, their own uncertainties that go with them. And so we're looking at these as a kind of a package or a suite of tools to manage each of those 4 boxes. And I won't necessarily sort of go into the details of which exact mechanism is going to be used for which kind of thing. That's under a lot of discussion and thinking from my colleagues in RIIO at the moment. But if you look on the timeline at the top, we are publishing our sector-specific methodology decision in December. And so that will give more detail on the application of some of these tools. I'd also say the box on the bottom right, where there is uncertainty along that axis on the chart, there's also the question of how do you know how uncertain you are? So without getting too meta, you have uncertainty about uncertainty, right? So if something's based on a forward forecast or scenario, or if you take a range of future energy scenarios and then drill them down into a forecast, how certain are you of those? Particularly when we're talking about asset investment, perhaps on a 40-year life cycle, being certain about the needs and whether it's going to meet a particular uplift in a certain type of technology or a low carbon technology rollout is very complex. And so you have to measure the needs of the consumer. Is this something which is very good for net zero, or is it something which is very costly? How do you balance those trade-offs? And I think that's something which we're grappling with. I think it's fair to say this is a complex area. The final part on this slide is basically to say digitalisation in general. There are differences in how these kind of issues are rolled out. Whether you take something as a blanket, this is needed across all license areas on a flat geographical basis, or whether in fact you're talking about a more targeted rollout where there are specific network issues and specific requirements. So again, you kind of go into this, how do you measure uncertainty? Is it uncertain that you need something blanket, or are you more sure in a specific location or at a specific voltage level that you will require a new kind of digitalization? And that's probably, in some instances, better value overall, rather than looking to roll everything out in a kind of a big one shot all at once. So the RIA price control, it's big and it's complicated, and it includes a lot of different tools. But these kind of discussions and trade-offs they go hand in hand with the price control, and we're working through, and we're working with stakeholders through the consultation process to really kind of fine-tune how we meet users' needs. So that's the one element of the three I wanted to talk through. The second is around policies which fall outside of the price control, but feed in some way. The majority of those on the left, with the exclusion of the digitalization strategies, I've been very close to or have led elements of. And they're things that we want to basically get moving. Where I was talking earlier about the overall strategy for modernizing energy data, these are the kind of specific instances where there is a license requirement or a license change, or something is going on with heat maps, for instance. So each of those are quite data heavy and digitalization heavy. There was a recent call for evidence around distributed generation, triggered really by the 9th of August power cut last year, but basically saying, do you need real-time visibility to mitigate against those kind of risks? And so that was an area where we're looking for more feedback, looking for costs and benefits to weigh up. How do we enhance visibility of distributed generation? Is it something which needs to be ubiquitous, or is there a voltage threshold at which it's most appropriate to have that kind of visibility? The LTDS and long-term development statement is an area where we're looking to standardize data exchange using a common information model. It's somewhere where digitalization is really quite key for sharing investment data. It's the kind of information that would drive flexibility markets, drive more informed investment decisions, and we think it's quite key. It's also tapping into a route to help enhance digitalization within the DNOs so that their existing IT systems are more interoperable themselves. Heat maps, operational data, action plans, and the clean energy package network development plan, as I was saying, all of those require data exchange. And as far as is possible, they're aligning with the themes outlined. Again, pinching part of an element of Dinka's slide earlier on, for instance, saying using standardization and interoperable information across sectors, making sure data is presumed open, making sure the costs and benefits are appropriate. So the call for evidence there, finding out about costs and benefits. So these are really quite tangible, specific instances where digitalization has been taken forward and deployed across our licensing program. Now, it won't have escaped you, there's a big hand on the right of the slide. We do need input from industry. This would be my plea across this presentation. We need input on how best to meet users' needs. Something we often grapple with is we talk about data and we talk about digitalization, and that's very good at a kind of narrative level. But when we say, well, okay, exactly what data do you need in order to deliver your business program? The answer, all the data, doesn't really help. We're talking about exactly what do you need and what would it do and what's the justification for that, and that's how we make targeted policies. We can't have a kind of overarching thing that says, everything at once. That's a strategy level, and these kind of processes on licenses and codes really need to be quite specific and explicit about what users actually need and what we can do to get there. So please do feedback, and please do respond to consultations. I do read them, as do my colleagues. Call for evidence. We need to know what you actually mean when you say you need data or you need digitalization. So that's my ask for the afternoon. Now, to move on to the last of the three, innovation funding. When we're talking about innovation for net zero, we're talking about investment for net zero. This is probably one of the key areas that will pick up interest relative to the title. So the text here is pinched out of the draft determinations document from July. The Strategic Innovation Fund, or SIF, is likely to supersede what is currently the NIC, the Network Innovation Competition, but with more of an emphasis around net zero, and also an emphasis around coordination, collaboration, and whole system solutions. So I know I've talked more about distribution, but this is an area where cross-vector, cross-sector type of solutions, whether it's transmission to distribution or whether it's gas to elect, how these things can be better considered and coordinate is one of the key reasons behind looking at this SIF. Now, the details of the SIF are not fully bottomed out. These are still under consideration, and be forthcoming details coming through from my Rio colleagues. But I think this is really worth highlighting, that there's a real emphasis around net zero, there's a real emphasis around whole systems coordination, and that there's a specific innovation fund which is being designed to progress those projects which, they are innovative. They're not something which is business as usual under the price control. They need further exploration, and that's why there's a new fund to enable that. So to wrap up, Ofgem's role in net zero, it is complex, it is difficult. We are facing a range of trade-offs, be they around our role and our remit, or be they around the actual kind of delivery end of these type policies. The three areas that I've talked about, Rio, policies in general, and innovation, all of those are on the same theme. Like, they meet our overall strategic narrative and our objectives as a regulator. And determining how best to apply them is something we need input from industry from, whether it's a Rio broad consultation or whether it's one of the specific policies. Input and feedback helps us make sure we're actually delivering on our end of the kind of net zero investment requirements policy. So my encouraging line at the end of this would be, do feedback, do send us responses, and we are acutely aware of the need for digitalisation. We are progressing policies that are detailed to deliver this, and I hope you can see that, and I hope this has been informative. So look forward to any questions. Thank you.